Thanksgiving was supposed to be the one day I could forget how empty my house felt. A day where family, no matter how broken, came together under one roof and pretended everything was still intact. I had told myself all week that this year would be different. That maybe the distance between me and my daughter would finally shrink. Even if just for one meal. I walked up the path to my ex-wife's home, the November air crisp, carrying the faint smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pie drifting through the cracked kitchen window. My heart beat faster with every step. I clutched the bottle of wine I had saved up for, a small gift, though I knew she probably wouldn't touch it. It wasn't about the wine, it was about showing I still cared, that I still belonged. Inside, laughter filled the air. Her laughter. My daughter's. I paused at the door, letting it wash over me, letting it warm me for a moment before I knocked. I could almost see her face as a child again, eyes lighting up when I walked into a room, running into my arms as if I was the center of her world. That memory was what gave me the courage to step inside when the door opened. "Dad," she said flatly, not with joy but with that distant tone I had grown used to. Still, I smiled, trying to pretend it didn't cut me. The dining table stretched across the room, already set with steaming dishes. The turkey glistened, mashed potatoes piled high, cranberry sauce glistening in crystal bowls. There were 12 chairs, 11 of them filled. The 12th sat at the end empty, waiting. Or so I thought. I stepped toward it, offering a polite nod to her stepfather, who gave me the same thin-lipped smile he always did, one that never reached his eyes. My ex-wife barely looked up, but I told myself it didn't matter. My daughter was here. That was enough. I reached for the chair, but before I could pull it back, her voice cut through the chatter. "Don't." At first I thought she was speaking to someone else. I froze, hand hovering over the chair. The room fell quiet. Every eye turned to me. "Don't sit there," she repeated, louder this time. Her voice was firm, sharp in a way I had never heard from her before. "Why not?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my effort to keep it steady. "Because you don't deserve to. You don't do anything. You're useless, Dad. You shouldn't even be here." The words hit harder than any slap, harder than any insult I had ever endured in my life. My own daughter, the child I had carried on my shoulders, the child I had sung to sleep, looked at me as if I was nothing but an intruder. Someone chuckled under their breath. I couldn't tell who. My ears rang, my face burned, and for a second I felt like the walls of the room were closing in on me. I just wanted to have dinner with you," I whispered. She crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. "You think showing up once a year makes you part of this family? You think we need you? We don't. You've never given us anything. Why should you sit at this table like you earned it?" Her stepfather smirked, not saying a word, but his silence was permission. My ex-wife looked down at her plate, pretending the turkey skin was more interesting than the implosion happening in front of her. Not one person at that table came to my defense. The chair that I thought had been waiting for me suddenly felt like it had never been mine. My knees weakened. My pride screamed at me to walk out, to slam the door and never return. But my heart, my stupid heart, still wanted her to change her mind, to laugh and say she was joking, to remind me she still saw me as her father. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "I know I haven't been perfect. I know." "Stop," she snapped, cutting me off. "Just stop. You don't get to play the victim here. You're pathetic. Everyone knows it. So do us all a favor, stand there, or go home. But don't sit at this table like you matter." Her words weren't just sharp, they were final. The whispers rose again, and this time the laughter wasn't hidden. It was open, cruel, as though my humiliation was entertainment. I felt the stares burning into me, dissecting me, judging me. My hand slipped from the chair. My throat tightened until it hurt to breathe. My vision blurred with the weight of unshed tears, but I refused to let them fall in front of her. Not here. Not now. So I stood. I stood while they ate. I stood while my daughter laughed at her stepfather's jokes, while she passed him the gravy, while she looked at him with the pride and affection she once reserved for me. Every second felt like an eternity. Each bite of food they took echoing in my chest like a hammer striking. My stomach growled, but the hunger inside me was nothing compared to the hollowness spreading through my heart. The chair remained empty, my chair. Or maybe it had never been mine to begin with. As I watched, frozen in that room full of warmth that no longer welcomed me, I realized that sometimes betrayal doesn't come from strangers or enemies. It comes from the ones you love most, the ones you gave everything for. And as much as I wanted to believe this was the lowest point of my life, the cruelest cut, I was wrong, because that was only the beginning of a wound deeper than any knife could cut. People often look at a single moment and think it tells the whole story. They see a man standing at the edge of a Thanksgiving table, rejected by his own daughter, and they think they understand. They think it must have been years of absence or carelessness that led to that scene. They never see the years before, the nights of sacrifice, the choices made in silence, the hunger I swallowed so she wouldn't have to. They never see the whole truth. When my daughter was born, I thought my life had finally found its meaning. I remember holding her for the first time in the delivery room, her tiny fingers curling instinctively around mine. I made a promise that day, not just to her but to myself, that no matter what storms came, I would be her shelter. I wasn't a rich man. I didn't have degrees or titles to my name, but I had 2 hands willing to work and a heart that beat for her. Her mother and I were young, and maybe that was the first fracture in our story. What we lacked in age and wisdom, we tried to fill with hope. But hope, as I later learned, doesn't pay rent. It doesn't buy diapers or formula or medicine when your baby has a fever at 3 in the morning. Those early years were a blur of long shifts and sleepless nights. I would leave before dawn, work until my back ached and my eyes burned, then stumble home just in time to kiss her forehead before collapsing into bed. And yet, despite the exhaustion, I cherished it. Every giggle, every step, every first word, it was worth it. She was my reason. When bills piled high and cupboards went bare, I found ways to stretch what little I had. I remember eating instant noodles for weeks so I could afford her school shoes. I told myself it didn't matter if I went hungry as long as she never did. But marriage is fragile when weighed down by poverty. Her mother grew restless. She wanted more than I could give. She saw the tired man coming home late, smelling of sweat and grease, and resented the life she felt trapped in. Arguments became routine. Love turned into blame. And one day, it ended. The papers were signed, the custody agreements written, and suddenly, I was no longer a husband, just a father trying to cling to the one piece of family left to me. The divorce shattered me more than I ever admitted. But losing time with my daughter was what truly broke me. Every other weekend, a handful of holidays, that was the schedule. I lived for those moments. I saved every spare dollar, planned every visit, tried to make each second with her feel like a lifetime. We'd go to the park, share ice cream, watch old cartoons together. I wanted her to know that even if her parents' marriage had failed, my love for her never would. I worked extra shifts to afford birthday presents. I walked miles when I couldn't afford bus fare, just to make it to her recitals. I stood in the back of crowded auditoriums, clapping louder than anyone else, hoping she would see me, hoping she would feel proud. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she looked away. But I kept showing up, because showing up was all I had to offer. There were nights I cried alone, wondering if she'd ever understand, wondering if she'd grow up resenting me for the things I couldn't give her. Her mother's new husband had money, connections, a polished life that sparkled in ways mine never could. He bought her gadgets, trips, designer clothes. Meanwhile, I was the man with calloused hands and a second-hand coat. I feared every day that she would compare us and decide I wasn't enough. Still, I kept trying. I cooked her favorite meals on the weekends she stayed over. I decorated my small apartment with drawings she made, pictures of us together, mementos of moments that mattered to me more than anything else. I didn't care that my walls were peeling or that my furniture was old when she was there. The place felt like home. I remember one particular winter. Money was tight, tighter than usual. My hours had been cut at work, and the heating bill was higher than I could manage. The cupboards were nearly bare, but I refused to let her see the truth. I told her I wasn't hungry, that I had eaten earlier. She sat at the table with a bowl of soup I had stretched thin, smiling as though nothing was wrong. I watched her eat, my own stomach twisting in knots, and I told myself I would do it 1,000 times over if it meant she was cared for. Years blurred into each other, a cycle of sacrifice and hope. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to change. At first it was small, less excitement when I picked her up, shorter conversations, distracted answers. I chalked it up to age, to teenage moods, to the natural drift that comes when a child grows older. But deep down, I knew. I knew there were words being whispered into her ears when I wasn't around. I knew she was being taught to see me not as her father, but as a shadow. It broke me, but I told myself love was stronger, that if I just kept showing her, one day she'd realize. One day she'd look back and see the truth, that I had never stopped fighting for her, even when the world painted me as nothing. But love, I've learned, doesn't always win quickly. Sometimes it's drowned out by wealth, by manipulation, by the easy lies that villains tell to children who don't yet know better. I sacrificed my youth, my health, my pride for my daughter. And I would have done it all again, twice over, without hesitation. Still, I never imagined the very child I gave everything for would turn against me. If I closed my eyes, I can almost pinpoint the exact moment the shift began. It wasn't sudden, not a lightning strike that tore my daughter away from me, but a slow erosion, like waves against stone. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, but over time, I couldn't deny it anymore. The distance wasn't just age or busy schedules. It had a name. It had a face. His name was Robert. Though everyone in the family called him Rob, he entered my daughter's life wearing the polished smile of a man who had never missed a meal, never worked a double shift, never patched holes in his shoes with duct tape. He was the kind of man who carried himself like the world owed him something, and somehow, the world seemed eager to pay its debt. To my ex-wife, he was a savior. To my daughter, he became a role model. To me, he was a shadow always waiting to remind me of what I wasn't. At first, Rob played his role carefully. He didn't outright insult me, at least not in front of crowds. Instead, he mastered the art of subtlety, weaving his poison into everyday moments. I would arrive to pick up my daughter, my car sputtering as I parked in front of their immaculate driveway. And there he'd be, leaning casually against his gleaming SUV, keys dangling, eyes scanning me like I was some stray dog who had wandered into his territory. "Rough ride you've got there," he'd say, a chuckle tucked into the corner of his voice. "But hey, it gets you from point A to B, right?" I'd force a tight smile, trying not to let my daughter see the humiliation burning in my chest. She, of course, laughed along. She was too young to see the barbs hidden beneath his words. Or maybe she just wanted to believe he was the better man. At birthday parties, he was the one handing out the biggest gifts, the latest tablet, the trendiest sneakers, things I could never afford. I'd show up with something I had saved for months to buy, something thoughtful, something personal. And while my daughter would thank me politely, her eyes always lit up brighter when she tore the wrapping paper off his expensive boxes. The message was clear. He was abundance, I was scarcity. He was strength, I was weakness. But Rob's game wasn't just about money. It was about rewriting my place in her life. "Your dad works hard," he'd say at dinners where I was conveniently left out. "But sometimes working hard isn't the same as working smart. You deserve someone who can give you the best." He never had to raise his voice. He never had to say the word failure. It was etched in the spaces between his sentences, painted in the way he looked at me when he thought no one else was watching. And little by little, I saw the way my daughter began to look at me differently. She no longer reached for my hand when we crossed the street. She no longer asked me to tuck her in when she visited. She no longer clung to my every word, the way she once did when I told her bedtime stories about knights and heroes. Instead, her questions turned sharp, comparisons slipped from her lips like daggers. "Why don't you live in a house like Rob's?" she'd ask innocently, chewing on a cookie he had bought. "Why can't you take me on vacations like he does? Why don't you dress nicer, Dad?" Each question sliced deeper than the last, because I didn't have answers that could satisfy her. How could I explain that every penny I earned went into keeping a roof over my head, keeping my car alive long enough to reach her, keeping food on the table when she visited? How could I make her see that love isn't measured in gifts or vacations, but in the nights I went hungry so she wouldn't? Rob knew. He saw the cracks, and he pried them open wider with every chance he got. One day, I arrived at her soccer game. I had rushed from work, still in my uniform, grease stains on my sleeves. I stood at the edge of the field, clapping, shouting her name, cheering until my throat was raw. She barely glanced at me. But when Rob arrived late, dressed in his tailored coat, her eyes lit up. She waved, she smiled, she played harder, as if his approval was the only one that mattered. After the game, I brought her a sandwich I had made. She wrinkled her nose, eyes darting toward Rob, who was already holding out a fast food bag with her favorite burger inside. She took his without hesitation. Mine stayed untouched. I told myself it was just a phase, that kids are easily swayed by shiny things. But the truth was harder to face. My daughter was slowly, steadily being taught to see me as less. And Rob didn't stop at subtle digs. Over time, his confidence grew bolder. Once, when I came to pick her up, he leaned close as she ran inside to grab her jacket. His voice was low, cold, meant only for me. "You know, maybe it'd be better if you just stepped back. She doesn't need confusion in her life. She needs stability." She needs someone who can provide. The implication hung heavy between us. He wanted me gone. Out of the picture. Erased. I clenched my fists, but I swallowed my anger. For her sake, I couldn't explode. I couldn't give him more ammunition. But the hardest part wasn't his words, it was how effective they became. My daughter laughed more at his jokes. She mirrored his mannerisms. She began calling him dad when she thought I wasn't around. The first time I heard it, I thought my chest might cave in. I wanted to confront her, to demand why she would give away the title I had bled for, starved for, sacrificed for. But I bit my tongue. Because love isn't supposed to be about control. It's supposed to be about patience, about faith. I told myself if I just kept showing up, she'd remember. She'd see through the lies. She'd realize who had been there all along. But love doesn't always win against manipulation. And little by little, I saw her slipping through my fingers. And then came the day I realized my daughter no longer saw me as her father. Every parent tells themselves that no matter how hard things get, they'll find a way to stay in their child's life. I repeated that mantra like a prayer, even when reality proved otherwise. Even as Rob tightened his grip on my daughter's heart. Even as the light in her eyes dimmed whenever she saw me. I refused to let go. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I showed up to her school plays, arriving early enough to save the best seat I could. My clothes might have smelled faintly of oil from the garage, and my shoes might have been worn down from years of use, but I sat proudly in the audience, cheering until my voice went hoarse. I clapped so hard my palms stung, hoping she would see me, hoping she would remember I was there. Sometimes she waved in my direction, though her eyes always darted quickly toward Rob sitting confidently beside her mother, holding a bouquet of flowers that dwarfed the single daisy I had scraped together enough money to buy. I showed up to her soccer games, even if it meant running straight from work without time to change. I'd stand on the sidelines, boots caked in grease, shouting her name. I'd bring her orange slices I had packed carefully, only to watch them wilt and touched while she munched on energy bars Rob had thoughtfully provided. She never meant to hurt me, not at first, but her gratitude toward him was always louder, more vibrant. While my efforts faded quietly into the background, I showed up on her birthdays, saving every penny I could spare to buy something meaningful, a journal because she loved writing, a necklace with her birthstone, a book she had once mentioned in passing. I wrapped each gift with care, sometimes even making the wrapping myself because I couldn't afford store-bought paper. She would smile politely, say thank you, and then tear into Rob's gift with an enthusiasm that eclipsed mine completely. He bought her a laptop one year, a new phone the next. How could my little trinkets compete with the sparkle of brand new technology? And yet, I never stopped. I skipped meals so I could put gas in my car and make the long drive to her choir concerts. I picked up extra shifts, working myself to exhaustion, just so I could afford the sneakers she wanted. I told myself it wasn't about outdoing Rob, it was about proving that no matter how small my contribution, my love was bigger. But children don't measure love the way parents do. They don't see the skipped dinners, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices made in silence. They see the final product, the gift in their hands, the food on the table, the seat taken in the audience. And when the scales were weighed, I always came up short. Over time, her responses became colder. Phone calls grew shorter. Text messages went unanswered. She started canceling our weekends together with flimsy excuses, school projects, plans with friends, not feeling well. But I knew it wasn't homework or illness keeping her from me. It was him. Once, I waited outside her school, excited to surprise her and take her out for ice cream like we used to. She walked out, spotted me, and her face fell. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice tinged with irritation. "I wanted to see you," I said, forcing a smile. "Thought we could grab some ice cream." She glanced back at her friends, who were whispering and giggling. "I can't. Rob's picking me up. He said he'd take me shopping." And just like that, she walked away, sliding into the passenger seat of his shiny car without so much as a wave goodbye. I stood there, ice cream gift card burning in my pocket, wondering how I had become the outsider in my own daughter's life. But still, I refused to quit. I volunteered at her school fundraisers, even when it meant standing in the cold selling raffle tickets while Rob and my ex-wife breezed in just long enough to be seen, their presence effortless compared to my strained attempts. I attended parent-teacher conferences, only to be met with polite smiles from teachers who clearly considered Rob the real parent now. He spoke with ease, confidence, while I fumbled with my words, anxious to prove my worth in front of my daughter. Everywhere I turned, he was there, larger, shinier, more successful. And every time she compared us, whether knowingly or not, I shrank a little smaller in her eyes. The loneliness that followed was unlike anything I had ever known. To love someone so fiercely while watching them drift further away is its own kind of torture. Nights in my apartment were quiet, the silence pressing against my chest like a weight I couldn't shake off. I'd stare at the photos of her taped to my refrigerator, the crayon drawings she once made for me, the crooked smile she wore when she was small. And I'd wonder where that little girl had gone, the one who used to cling to my hand and whisper that I was her hero. Still, I held on to hope. Hope that one day she would remember. Hope that one day she would see me not through Rob's eyes, but through her own. I kept showing up, because that's what fathers do. But each rejection, each cold shoulder, each moment where my love was overshadowed by his wealth carved deeper lines into my heart. And though I told myself I could endure it, that I could survive her growing indifference, the truth is I was already breaking. I thought my pain had reached its peak, until Thanksgiving arrived. As the years stretched on, the distance between me and my daughter became a canyon I could no longer leap across. At first, I had convinced myself it was just teenage rebellion, the natural pull toward independence. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Her coldness carried the weight of someone else's words, someone else's judgment being whispered into her ears. The sweetness she once had for me was replaced with sharp edges. Every conversation seemed to carry a hidden barb. "Why don't you ever have anything nice to give me?" she asked one Christmas, tearing the wrapping off the sweater I had saved 2 months' worth of overtime pay to buy. "Rob got me a designer bag. This looks cheap." The word cheap landed like a hammer on my chest. I wanted to remind her that cheap doesn't mean worthless, that sometimes the greatest gifts come from sacrifice, not price tags. But I bit my tongue. I smiled weakly and told her I was glad she liked it, even though she tossed it aside before reaching for Rob's next glittering gift. Requests for money became more frequent as she grew older. "Dad, can you give me 200 for a school trip? Dad, I need money for new shoes. Dad, can you help with prom expenses?" Every time she asked, I gave, even if it meant scraping together rent late or skipping groceries for myself. But gratitude was scarce. There was no hug, no thank you text, not even an acknowledgement most of the time. It was as though my role in her life had been reduced to nothing more than a wall of tan, inadequate one at that. What hurt most wasn't just the lack of appreciation, but the way she compared me to him, again and again. "Rob says real men don't complain about money. Rob says if you worked harder, maybe you wouldn't struggle so much. Rob says I deserve someone who can actually provide for me." Each phrase was a dagger, not because of the words themselves, but because of who was speaking them. My daughter, my flesh and blood, the little girl I had starved for, cried for, lived for, and the rest of the family. They didn't help. My ex-wife, once content with silent contempt, began chiming in. At family gatherings, she'd make remarks meant to sting. "Maybe if you'd been more ambitious, she wouldn't have to rely on Rob for the life she deserves." Aunts and uncles, swayed by appearances, nodded along. Cousins whispered and laughed, comparing my beat-up car to Rob's gleaming SUV. I became the butt of their jokes, the symbol of failure. They forgot, or perhaps never cared, about the sacrifices hidden in my silence. They saw only the surface, a man in second-hand clothes, arriving late from work, unable to shower away the grease on his hands. One evening, I tried to have a serious conversation with my daughter. She had just turned 17, and I wanted to remind her of who I was, of everything I had tried to give her. "I know you think I don't have much," I said softly, sitting across from her in the small diner I could barely afford. "But every choice I've made has been for you. I need you to understand that." She didn't even look up from her phone. "I don't need excuses, Dad. I need results." Rob says actions speak louder than words. I swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in my eyes. I wanted to shout that my actions were everywhere, in the bills paid late because of her needs, in the shoes I wore until the solace gave out, in the hours I worked until my back screamed. But none of it mattered if she couldn't see. Her words only grew harsher. Once, when I told her I couldn't afford an expensive trip she wanted, she sneered, "You're just a failure. No wonder Mom left you." That night, I cried for the first time in years, not because of what she said, but because of how easily it came from her lips, as though she truly believed it. I began to feel like a ghost in her life, tolerated only when she needed something, discarded when she didn't. Every encounter left me lonelier, emptier. But even then, I couldn't stop loving her. I couldn't stop hoping that somewhere deep inside, She still remembered the father who had once been her hero. Still, the ridicule, the comparisons, the slow erasure of my worth, it wore me down. I walked into family events bracing myself for humiliation, for the smug looks, the quiet laughter, the whispered judgments. I felt like an intruder in my own bloodline, tolerated only because walking away would mean abandoning her completely. But no amount of preparation could have braced me for what came next, because all of those years of cruel remarks, all of those digs at my pride, all of those sacrifices dismissed as worthless, none of it compared to the betrayal that would leave me speechless at the dinner table. Thanksgiving should have been a day of warmth, laughter, and gratitude. The air was thick with the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pies, yet for me, it carried something far heavier, an uncheckable dread I couldn't name. I walked into my ex-wife's house holding a small pie I'd bought from the grocery store. I couldn't afford much, but I wanted to bring something, anything, to show I still belonged at the table. The dining room was already full, everyone buzzing with chatter and smiles. Rob sat at the head of the table like a king on his throne, his arm draped casually across the back of his chair. My daughter sat beside him, glowing with pride as though she were his, not mine. I took a hesitant step forward, clutching the pie in my trembling hands. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said softly, forcing a smile. "I brought something." Rob smirked, his eyes sweeping over the cheap packaging. "Store-bought. Figures." His voice was low, but loud enough for several people to hear. A ripple of chuckles moved through the room. I tried to ignore it. My gaze went to my daughter. She didn't even smile back. She just stared at me with a cool detachment I'd never seen in her eyes before. I pulled out a chair at the corner of the table, hoping to slip in quietly, unnoticed. But before I could sit, her voice cut through the room like a blade. "Dad, stop." The chatter died instantly. Every face turned toward us. My heart pounded as I froze in place, half bent over the chair. "What is it?" I asked, my voice already breaking. "You don't need to sit here," she said flatly, her tone as cold as ice. "You don't deserve a seat at this table." The words didn't register at first. My ears rang, my chest tightened. I blinked at her, hoping I'd misheard. "What? What do you mean?" Her face hardened. "You're useless, Dad. You've never given me anything real. Rob's the one who provides for me. Rob's the one who's there for me. You're just extra." Laughter broke out at the far end of the table, followed by the sound of someone whispering. Finally said it out loud. My ex-wife smirked, her wineglass raised as if in silent approval. Rob leaned back in his chair, smug satisfaction painted across his face. I stood there, gripping the back of the chair so tightly my knuckles went white. My mouth opened, but no words came out. My daughter's voice had turned into a stranger's, slicing me open in front of everyone. "Sweetheart," I whispered, my throat raw. "I worked my whole life for you. I gave you everything I had." She rolled her eyes. "Yeah, and it was never enough. Just go stand over there or something. Don't embarrass me." Gasps and stifled laughs filled the room. I felt them like stones thrown against my chest. My face burned, not just with humiliation, but with the shattering realization that she meant every word. No one defended me. Not a single relative spoke up. They sat there in silence, some smirking, some looking away, but none brave enough to stand with me. I had never felt so small, so invisible. Slowly, I let go of the chair and straightened my back. My legs trembled, my vision blurred with tears I fought desperately to hold back. I carried the pie to the corner of the counter, setting it down as gently as if it were made of glass. Then I stood off to the side, watching as the family feasted, laughed, and passed plates around while I remained unseen, unwanted, forgotten. Every bite they took felt like another nail in the coffin of my dignity. Every laugh, another reminder that I had been erased, replaced, discarded. And yet, beneath the humiliation, something stirred. A quiet voice deep within me whispered through the noise, through the shame. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, firm, undeniable. And in that silence, I decided something that would change everything. That night, after everyone had eaten their fill and left me to stand in silence, I drove home with the kind of emptiness no words can capture. The road was quiet, but inside my chest a storm raged. Each mile felt heavier than the last, the echoes of her words useless, extra, don't embarrass me pounding against my skull. When I reached my small apartment, I didn't bother turning on the lights. I sat on the couch in the dark, my body shaking with sobs I had held back all evening. For years I had endured whispers, jokes, comparisons, but hearing those words from her, my own daughter, had broken something inside me. I looked at the framed picture on the wall, one of the few I owned. She was 6 in that photo, her arms wrapped around my neck, smiling with missing front teeth. Best dad ever was scribbled in crayon beneath it. I had kept it through every move, every hardship. But now, staring at it, I felt like that version of me the hero she once saw was nothing more than a ghost. Days passed in a blur. I went to work, came home, sat in silence. The weight of humiliation pressed down on me until breathing itself felt like labor. Food lost its taste. Sleep never came easy. Sometimes I woke up drenched in sweat, the sound of her voice replaying like a cruel lullaby. "You don't deserve a seat at this table." Family began to whisper again, but this time it wasn't mockery I heard. My sister called one evening, her voice slow and hesitant. "I'm sorry, brother. I should have said something. The way she spoke to you. It wasn't right. But apologies after silence are like rain on scorched earth, too little, too late." The damage had already been done. At work, my coworkers noticed my sunken eyes, the way I drifted through shifts like a ghost. One asked if I was okay. I smiled, the kind of hollow smile that fools no one, and said I was fine. Inside, though, I was collapsing. Every thought circled back to her. Every memory stung with betrayal. I tried calling my daughter, just once, praying she'd answer, praying there was still a shred of love buried somewhere inside her. But when the line clicked, it wasn't her voice I heard. It was Rob's. "She doesn't want to talk to you," he said flatly. "Do her a favor and stop trying. You're only making it worse." Then the line went dead. I stared at my phone until the screen dimmed, my hand trembling with rage and heartbreak. It was one thing for her to push me away in the heat of anger, but this was erasure. Rob wasn't just influencing her, he had replaced me entirely. At the next family gathering I didn't attend, relatives told me later there had been tension in the air. Some whispered about how cruel the Thanksgiving scene had been. A few questioned if Rob had gone too far in turning her against me, but no one spoke up directly. My daughter avoided the subject altogether, brushing it off as if it were nothing. Rob, on the other hand, reveled in his quiet victory, walking around with the smug confidence of a man who believed he had won. And maybe he had, because every night, when I lay down in my bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the truth. I had lost her, the man who once rocked her to sleep, who patched up her scraped knees, who sacrificed meals so she could eat. He no longer existed in her eyes. In his place was a stranger she dismissed with a single word: useless. But life has a way of bending, of turning sharp corners when you least expect it. As broken as I was, as hopeless as I felt, I didn't know then what was coming, because fate has a cruel way of revealing the truth, and it struck when they least expected it. The truth didn't come crashing down in a single moment. It trickled, like sunlight breaking through a storm cloud. And when it did, the weight of years finally shifted. It began with my sister. She had carried the guilt of her silence since Thanksgiving, and one evening, she finally spoke. "I can't keep this in anymore," she told my daughter during a family visit. "You need to know what your father gave up for you." At first, my daughter brushed it off, but my sister didn't let go. She told her about the nights I worked double shifts just so tuition would be covered, about the times I walked home instead of taking the bus because I didn't have the fare, about how I skipped meals so my daughter's plate would always be full. Then came the old letters. Years back, I had written to the school explaining why payments would be late, promising them I'd work extra hours to keep her enrolled. Those letters resurfaced when a family friend, who had worked in the school office, shared them. Each word was proof not of excuses, but of sacrifice. One by one, the walls Rob had built around her heart began to crack. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard later how her expression changed as the truth piled up. The smug certainty faded, replaced by confusion, then by something heavier: shame. She realized the man she had ridiculed, the man she called useless, was the very reason she had the education, the clothes, the opportunities she'd taken for granted. And Rob, his mask of superiority faltered. When confronted, he scoffed, dismissing my sacrifices as what any parent should do. But the smugness in his voice was thinner now, brittle, lacking its usual bite. For the first time, my daughter didn't defend him. She stayed quiet, her silence louder than any argument. The next time I saw her, she couldn't meet my eyes at first. We stood in the small hallway of my apartment, the distance between us heavy with everything unspoken. Finally, she whispered, "Dad, is it true?" I didn't answer with words. I just looked at her, the exhaustion of years etched into my face. She saw it then, the lines carved by sacrifice, the eyes dulled by disappointment, the love that had never left despite the hurt. Tears filled her eyes, spilling over as she choked out, "I didn't know. I thought you didn't care." I wanted to say I forgave her instantly, that her tears washed away the pain. But the truth is forgiveness is harder than that. The scars she left were deep, and healing would take time. Still, as she stood there trembling, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. "You didn't know," I said softly. "But now you do." Her sobs broke something open inside me. For years, I had carried my humiliation in silence, but in that moment, I reclaimed something greater: my dignity. I wasn't useless. I wasn't extra. I was a father who had given everything, even when no one noticed. And finally, the truth was undeniable. The family dynamic shifted after that. Relatives who once mocked me grew quiet, their judgment replaced by uncomfortable respect. My daughter began to distance herself from Rob, questioning the man who had poisoned her against me. And though forgiveness wasn't instant, the cracks in our relationship began to heal. Little by little, I knew we would never go back to the innocence of those early years. But I also knew this: love, even when bruised and battered, had a way of surviving. And though forgiveness was hard, I knew there was a greater lesson to share. Looking back, I realized betrayal leaves scars deeper than any wound to the body. The pain of being rejected by my own child on a day meant for gratitude nearly broke me. For a long time, I believed I had failed, that my worth as a father had been erased by her cruel words. But what I see now is this: love does not vanish simply because it goes unrecognized. Sacrifice does not lose value just because it is ignored. Yes, I stumbled through humiliation. Yes, I spent nights drowning in loneliness, questioning if all those years had been for nothing. But the truth is, every meal skipped, every shift worked, every tear shedded, all carried a weight far greater than their laughter or mockery. Those sacrifices built the foundation of my daughter's life, whether she acknowledged them or not. And though she once saw me as useless, the truth eventually found its way to her. Maybe too late to erase the pain, but not too late to remind me of who I am. I am not a failure. I am not a freeloader. I am a father who gave everything he had, and then gave more. Life has taught me that sometimes love is quiet, invisible, taken for granted. But its absence is deafening when finally revealed. And while forgiveness may take time, dignity is something I will never again surrender. So I stand taller now, not because the world suddenly respects me, but because I've learned to respect myself. I know the value of the years I carried her, even if others chose not to see it. Betrayal may have cut me open, but love stitched me back together. And in the end, that's what matters most. She may have denied me a plate, but she could never take away the years I fed her with love. The truth didn't come crashing down in a single moment. It trickled, like sunlight breaking through a storm cloud. And when it did, the weight of years finally shifted. It began with my sister. She had carried the guilt of her silence since Thanksgiving, and one evening, she finally spoke. "I can't keep this in anymore," she told my daughter during a family visit. "You need to know what your father gave up for you." At first, my daughter brushed it off, but my sister didn't let go. She told her about the nights I worked double shifts just so tuition would be covered, about the times I walked home instead of taking the bus because I didn't have the fare, about how I skipped meals so my daughter's plate would always be full. Then came the old letters. Years back, I had written to the school explaining why payments would be late, promising them I'd work extra hours to keep her enrolled. Those letters resurfaced when a family friend, who had worked in the school office, shared them. Each word was proof not of excuses, but of sacrifice. One by one, the walls Rob had built around her heart began to crack. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard later how her expression changed as the truth piled up. The smug certainty faded, replaced by confusion, then by something heavier: shame. She realized the man she had ridiculed, the man she called useless, was the very reason she had the education, the clothes, the opportunities she'd taken for granted. And Rob, his mask of superiority faltered. When confronted, he scoffed, dismissing my sacrifices as what any parent should do. But the smugness in his voice was thinner now, brittle, lacking its usual bite. For the first time, my daughter didn't defend him. She stayed quiet, her silence louder than any argument. The next time I saw her, she couldn't meet my eyes at first. We stood in the small hallway of my apartment, the distance between us heavy with everything unspoken. Finally, she whispered, "Dad, is it true?" I didn't answer with words. I just looked at her, the exhaustion of years etched into my face. She saw it then, the lines carved by sacrifice, the eyes dulled by disappointment, the love that had never left despite the hurt. Tears filled her eyes, spilling over as she choked out, "I didn't know. I thought I thought you didn't care. I wanted to say I forgave her instantly, that her tears washed away the pain. But the truth is forgiveness is harder than that. The scars she left were deep, and healing would take time. Still, as she stood there trembling, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. You didn't know, I said softly. But now you do. Her sobs broke something open inside me. For years, I had carried my humiliation in silence, but in that moment, I reclaimed something greater, my dignity. I wasn't useless. I wasn't extra. I was a father who had given everything, even when no one noticed. And finally, the truth was undeniable. The family dynamic shifted after that. Relatives who once mocked me grew quiet, their judgment replaced by uncomfortable respect. My daughter began to distance herself from Rob, questioning the man who had poisoned her against me. And though forgiveness wasn't instant, the cracks in our relationship began to heal. Little by little, I knew we would never go back to the innocence of those early years. But I also knew this: love, even when bruised and battered, had a way of surviving. And though forgiveness was hard, I knew there was a greater lesson to share. Looking back, I realized betrayal leaves scars deeper than any wound to the body. The pain of being rejected by my own child on a day meant for gratitude nearly broke me. For a long time, I believed I had failed, that my worth as a father had been erased by her cruel words. But what I see now is this: love does not vanish simply because it goes unrecognized. Sacrifice does not lose value just because it is ignored. Yes, I stumbled through humiliation. Yes, I spent nights drowning in loneliness, questioning if all those years had been for nothing. But the truth is, every meal skipped, every shift worked, every tear shedded, all carried a weight far greater than their laughter or mockery. Those sacrifices built the foundation of my daughter's life, whether she acknowledged them or not. And though she once saw me as useless, the truth eventually found its way to her. Maybe too late to erase the pain, but not too late to remind me of who I am. I am not a failure. I am not a freeloader. I am a father who gave everything he had, and then gave more. Life has taught me that sometimes love is quiet, invisible, taken for granted. But its absence is deafening when finally revealed. And while forgiveness may take time, dignity is something I will never again surrender. So I stand taller now, not because the world suddenly respects me, but because I've learned to respect myself. I know the value of the years I carried her, even if others chose not to see it. Betrayal may have cut me open, but love stitched me back together. And in the end, that's what matters most. She may have denied me a plate, but she could never take away the years I fed her with love.